somebody just shot me. Somebody's shooting at me. I'm like, well, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, I just wanted to tell you, like, I love you. And it was really scary. I'm like, okay. I'm like, please be safe. I'm like, are you safe? Did you get like plates? Nothing. He didn't get plates. And the last thing he said was like, we talked because at that point I was moving to Los Angeles, but I hadn't found a place. Actually, I had signed the lease that day. I signed the lease to come out here for the apartment that day. And he said to me, I'm happy you're getting out of New York. I'm excited for you. Let's have lunch before you go. And I said, absolutely, I'm open to that. And he was like, I love you. And I was like, I love you too. And he died that night.
Hello and welcome back to Healing and Growing Hand in Hand podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Tickle, and our guest today is Amanda Hart, and she is a holistic health coach, a trainer, and a nutritionalist. And we had a great pre-interview. I really enjoyed our conversation. And she's going to share her story, and I'll let her share that. And some of the things that that's going to come out of that is the coping strategies that she developed along the way, which we all do. And she's going to go into detail about that. And also the coaches, the teachers, and the other parents who helped her. So we were just talking about that before we started the recording button, and it was just, you're so fortunate to have that. And so I'm so glad you had that. And so anyway, Amanda, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you for having me, Lisa. I really appreciate being here. Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about you. You're a holistic health coach, a trainer, and a nutritionalist. That's a lot.
Yes. So I approach health from a wide spectrum, focusing on like movement and getting exercise in on a daily basis, but nutrition as well. Obviously, what we eat is really important, but I call myself kind of more like a coach because there's other strategies that I work into my client's life, like the mindset stuff, the stress management stuff, and the sleep stuff. It's all really important. It all ties in.
Yeah.
And without all these components, like I don't think you make up the full spectrum of health. So what I do is I work with my clients on all these things, not just a nutrition, standpoint, not just the movement, but also how are we sleeping at night? What are the habits we're cultivating at night? How are we managing our stress? What are we doing for our mindset work and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's a whole package. It really is. It all intertwines. It's so true. Because I notice as my mental health has improved, and working on my healing journey and just all the mental stuff that goes with it, the physical part has gotten a lot better. And I do pay much more attention. I need to get better about it. But yeah, there's always room for improvement for sure.
Awesome. Of course, for all of us, work in progress.
Yeah. Till we take our last breath.
That's it.
So what made you get into this? And you want to get into your story, or did you want to share with how you got into this?
I'll kind of get into it because it's kind of all related in a way.
Yeah, usually is.
Yep, exactly. It wasn't a plan. I think when I was super young, I wanted to be a writer. I used writing as a coping strategy before sports came into play. So I was a big reader, which is really unfortunate because now I don't read at all.
I know.
But I was like a reader. I'm talking 8, 9, 10 years old. I was reading like Stephen King novels. I kid you not.
Wow.
Anything to kind of like take my mind away.
Yeah.
And when we look at like my background, it kind of all makes sense. I wanted an escape. So I was a reader and I was a writer, and that's honestly what I thought I was going to do. And I would say I started running just kind of for fun, probably 10, 11 years old. And I realized I was quite fast after a while because, we would play stickball in the courtyard, and I was kind of always the one to, score points, and I was fast, so it kind of naturally evolved from there. I started competitively running when I was 12 or 13.
Wow.
But I'll back up a little bit. I grew up in Long Island, which is in New York. So we grew up, I was born in Plainview. I grew up in Hicksville up until I was 8 or 9 years old. My parents were together, but it was very rocky. And I remember just a lot of chaos in the home. My father was a drug dealer. So yeah, it was kind of like I remember my adolescent house being like Penn Station, people coming in and out all day, all day. So my role models I found on TV were Jim Carrey, Robin Williams, and Will Smith, like these three men who were just full of life and just
Yeah.
so happy, and they made me laugh. So I loved
Yeah.
them, and I loved reading, and I loved writing. So that was very much my escape up until my father got busted pretty for a big drug bust. I think when I was about 10 years old, we were
Mm.
forced to live in my grandmother's basement because we couldn't pay rent, and we were there for about 3 or 4 months, and that was a really hard time. I
Yeah.
just remember like sleeping under like just these nasty like pipes in my grandmother's basement. My grandmother was always somebody that I kind of looked up to and loved and admired. She always felt like a safe space. But unfortunately, in that time, she turned into like this awful person,
Oh
and it
no.
was quite traumatizing. Yeah, I
Yeah.
would see my mother and her literally having physical fights.
Oh
Um,
God.
yeah, and it was my ninth birthday. So I said 10, but it was my ninth birthday, and we celebrated it in that basement. And it was a really rough time. My brother was 7. My sister was 3 years older than me. She was like probably 12 or 13. So she was actually out playing often. So it was me and my brother, and I was always trying to even then protect him because there was chaos in the house. My father was not there, but my mother and my grandmother had this awful relationship. And it was around this time my mother became suicidal.
Oh.
She actually said, like, I'm going to kill myself. And
Oh
as a
God.
9 year old, I remember begging her at that point, please don't kill yourself, mom.
Yeah.
Like, don't do it. And running still wasn't in like my life yet. I was still pretty young. And it wasn't until luckily we got into Section 8 housing. My mother was, actually witty enough and cognitive enough to apply for that, knowing we had to get out of that environment.
Yeah.
So we got in, luckily. So it was her and the 3 kids. And we got into Section 8 housing in Oyster Bay, Long Island. And Oyster Bay happened to be this like beautiful town. It was rather wealthy in the late 90s. I'm not sure what it's like now, but there seemed to be a lot of wealth and then like a lot of poverty. It was either or. Um, and we got in there, and luckily the school system there was just phenomenal. The public school system of Oyster Bay High School, middle school at that point, I was going to middle school. So
That's
I
good.
made friends rather quickly, and it was around that time, I would say around 11, 12, I started just, again, this is where I started playing stickball. I realized I was fast. And luckily, I made some really good friends, really, really great friends. And the home life was still rather just chaotic and not stable. And there was not a lot of just guidance,
Yeah.
if you will. I'd come home from doing like needing to do homework. I was categorized like pretty early with a learning disability. I'll back up even more. When I was 3 years old, I stopped speaking. So they thought that there was
Oh.
actually something wrong with me. But when you actually take kids in trauma environments, it's actually not quite uncommon for them to go through either behavioral issues,
Mhm.
being diagnosed with learning disabilities. I stopped talking when I was 3 for reasons, I'm sure kind of made sense for me then.
Yeah.
So I was put into speech pathology pretty young, resource room for learning disability. So I was getting a lot of support at school, and I felt really held. When I was
Mm.
9 years old, when we just moved to Oyster Bay in fifth grade, actually it was fourth grade, I said something out loud, and the teacher said to me, well, that's not normal and that's not good. You should go see a guidance counselor. Like, you need to talk to somebody on a daily basis. And that was when my father was in jail for his long
Mm.
stint. So I must have said something, and the teacher was like, this girl needs some guidance, extra guidance. So I
Mhm.
was really being supported, luckily,
Yeah.
in my school environment. It was actually when I would go home when I would feel just lost and
Yeah.
just not good. But luckily at that time, then the friend circle started really building, and I found myself going over to my friends' houses as much as I could
Mhm.
because there I felt the support, there I felt the
Mhm.
safety. and even as simple as eating healthy meals. And I was like a kid who was so grateful for that because I wasn't getting that at home. My mother didn't cook much. It was like, well, whatever was in the food pantry, which was like cold cereal. Once in a while, she'd make pasta with the ragu and leave it in there for us to eat. It was pretty nasty. So when I would go to my friends' houses, like I was so grateful, and I would clean up after my friends
Mhm.
would just leave the table, but I'd be like, let me clean up. So the parents would be like, "You're wonderful. You can come back anytime you want to eat here." you
Like,
know,
I'll be back. I'll
um,
be back. I promise.
and I did. A lot of my parents' friends, I would, I really turned to for that motherly support, and that figure in my life.
Yeah.
And this was about the time in gym class when you would start running the mile,
Yeah.
and this is when I discovered, wow, I actually have some talent here because I was just smoking all these girls during, just running this mile, no problem. Zoomy, like around the track 4 times, boom, I'm done. And like the rest of the girls are taking the whole period. I was done, whatever, 8 minutes, I'm not sure. Um, so they were like, this kid's got talent, And shortly after that, I didn't necessarily choose to try out for track or cross country, but it kind of fell into my lap. I was hanging out with my friends was like also an escape, and I'm so grateful
Yeah.
for this moment. It was in middle school. I was probably up to no good. I was going around the back of the school after school was out that day, and at that time we were experimenting. So I think somebody had some cigarettes, so I was going
Yeah.
to smoke some cigarettes.
Hmm.
And the middle school cross country coach came out of nowhere. He's like, "Hey Adele," that was my last name back then. He's like, "I heard you run that mile pretty fast. You want to try out for cross country practice? You should come tomorrow." And just that comment and just that acknowledgement of being good at something and having somebody recognize that completely changed the course of my life.
I bet.
Yeah. So, yeah, I was like, wow, he said I'm good at something. Like, he recognized me,
I know.
and it
He
wasn't in the
found you and
cards.
said it. He found you and said it. You didn't go up and ask him. He found you and said it.
Correct.
Wow.
Correct. And that just goes to show like the community, like, the
Yeah.
teachers, my friends' parents, like all of this was honestly just luck. And just if it was a completely different environment, I could see how I would have just crumbled,
Yeah.
at that point. So many kids don't have that opportunity. So many kids are born into poverty and chaos, and they are not going to a supportive school with
Yeah.
the right guidance and the right teachers who actually care,
Yeah.
and it is just so important. That's when my life changed pretty much.
I
I
bet.
tried
I
out
was going to say
for
that was a game changer, right? Because you were at a pivotal
that's it.
point. You were totally at a
That's it.
pivotal point in your life. And that was
Hmm.
totally a game changer. Wow.
I would have become like a hardcore, probably
Yeah,
drug addict or a
possibly.
hardcore athlete. And because that's just my personality. Like
Right.
I was very extreme. And, I was diving into something head on as hard as I could. And it was at that point where I was like, okay, what do I have to lose? So I went to practice that week, and I found a family. I found my chosen family, and I found Mr. Cotter, who was the middle school coach. He became like, my father in a way, and
Mm-hmm.
it grew from there. That was middle school, and then I tried out for varsity because I was really good. So I was running varsity pretty young,
Wow.
and from there, it really grew into just sports saved my life, in a
Mm-hmm.
way, and running saved my life, and running then became this mode to get out of the house. Really, like, so I would be home, and I would just wonder how the hell I was going to make it out of high school. Like, fast forward, like, how am I going to make it out of these four walls? Felt so trapped. um, my mother and I became it even more just in a horrible relationship. Her and I were just completely butting heads. It became so bad that we couldn't even be in the same room together. I just didn't respect her at all with her drug habits and her neglect and her narcissism. Everything revolved around her. There was a lot of resentment.
Mm-hmm.
And at this time, my father really wasn't in my life anymore. I think I had left the door open, but it was very tumultuous because the only love that man ever gave me it was very confusing.
Yeah.
And it was because of the fact that there was also sexual trauma involved in my relationship with him. So yes, there was sexual abuse with him when he did live with us, and I remember just trying to still build something with him. So when I get the
Yeah.
phone calls from prison, uh, still kind of wanting his approval, still leaving
Yeah.
that door open. This is probably 13, 14 years old,
Yeah.
and taking his calls and not having any kind of positive role model for a male in my life besides my coaches at that time, but still wanting his. And him asking me at that time, um, so how I have your picture hanging up in the cell, and all the guys ask about like how you're so pretty and who is that. And then he would ask me like, how big is your cup size now?
Oh
Yeah,
my God.
yeah,
Ugh.
yeah, yeah.
This is
So
while you're on the phone with him and you are excited about getting his phone call because you're still trying to have him in your life. And this is the questions you get
exactly.
asked.
Correct. Correct. So, I know I've jumped around a bit, but like, I didn't close the door actually with my father in that relationship. I'm 38 right now, up until a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And I'll get there, but that's also why I had changed my name,
Ah,
my last
okay.
name.
Yep.
Hmm.
I thought about doing that too at one
So,
point.
yeah, yeah, and I completely understand why people do.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that really like my mother. I had such a rocky relationship with her in my teens, but at the end of the day, I could look back now and realize she tried, in
As
her
best
own
she
messed up
could.
way. Hmm. And look, she was neglectful, and yes, like there was other like physical abuse at one point when we were young, and yeah, she gave my sister a black eye by throwing something at my sister's face. Her and I couldn't even be in the same room together without being physically violent with each other at
Mm-hmm.
one point. But I was not afraid to hit my mother back in my teens, and I'm not proud of that.
Yeah.
But again, that anger and that resentment was so prominent.
You
I
were also in
couldn't.
survival mode.
Yeah. So when I was about 16, I moved out. I started living with a boyfriend at the time, which was another savior. Like I just looked anywhere I could to just get out.
Mm-hmm.
And when I would talk about college being a dream and really wanting to go, she would scoff at me. She would laugh at me, and she'd be like, "Good luck paying for that. Who's paying for that? I'm not." She just comes from such a scarcity mindset, and it's
Mm-hmm.
something that I'm still trying to just reverse
Me
and
too.
correct. It's hard. It's
It
hard. It's the
is.
one plaguing thing that still gets me. But I've worked decades to forgive my mother. The narcissistic abuse, the neglect, the physical abuse, the emotional abuse. Every time I tried to have a real conversation with her, she just wasn't available. Up and like so much so that even if I tried to have conversations with her, she would walk out of the room. Um,
Yeah.
and she did use drugs as well. Like I would see her using drugs. And again, she didn't purposely do it in front of us, so carelessly. Uh, but it was still there. We recognized when she was
Mm-hmm.
using with her then boyfriend, and it was a lot to see.
Yeah.
It was just like
Confusing.
that's how they yes. But luckily, 16 years old, I was pretty much out. And
Mm-hmm.
at that time, I was coming up with a plan to get to college. And if it wasn't going to be college, I needed to get out. So I was like, I'm going to go to the military if it's not college. And at this point, I was still seeing guidance counselors at the high school. I was still getting the support from my coaches. And my coaches truly, like, they knew we were poor. So, like, being the number one runner, like, I guess I was pretty good. My coaches would be like, after a few months or after a season, you need new running sneakers, kid.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't afford. I'm ask your mother. It's not an option. And they would come the next day with running sneakers. they would buy me stuff. And I mean, not like, but necessary stuff,
Right.
My guidance counselor, I looked at as a sister. She was, she kind of, she was somebody I saw pretty much every day. I mean, when I think I had the same guidance counselor from eighth grade until my senior year, and
Wow.
that was therapy for me. And before that, it was another male, but they all just led me. It was so helpful to have normal adults
Hmm.
point things out and say, that's not normal, kid. What you're going through is not normal. And that's okay to feel the way you do. And for an adult to be able to, help you zoom out as a kid,
Yeah.
to recognize your emotions, to pinpoint why you feel the way you do. It made me feel like my inability to learn math was okay because of all the other crap I had to deal with.
Yeah.
I wasn't thinking about geometry. I was thinking about my next meal gonna be.
Yeah, exactly. Survival mode. Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was prominent most of my adolescence and into my teens. So it was my guidance counselor who actually said, instead of the military, you could consider going to college on an athletic scholarship. And I loved running. I continued to run throughout my high school career, but I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. But when it became a mode to get out, I was like, no brainer.
Yeah.
I'm in.
Yeah.
So it was actually my guidance counselor with the okay of her higher ups in the school knowing she was the one taking me to go see colleges. She was the one helping me to apply.
Oh.
The whole school kind of worked their magic to help me apply to a wide range of colleges, waiving the fees, knowing I didn't have the means to afford, because it costs money to apply to colleges.
Oh yeah.
It did then. So, I applied to, I think, 14 schools, all
Wow.
the fees waived, and I got into 11 because even though I was like, special needs and whatever, not special needs, special ed, um, you know, I still averaged a pretty high, GPA. I still
Hmm.
was like an 88 average kid. I did extracurricular activities. I was an athlete. I was actually the captain of my team my junior and senior year. My teachers loved me. So, all those things worked in my benefit. And the dream of going to college really was taking place. And then I was started going on recruiting trips and all that. And I chose the college at that time that I just kind of meshed the best with as far as the team goes. So I actually wound up choosing Hofstra University on Long Island because I had just such a great experience on the recruiting trip. So the trauma I don't regret. I do think in a way, spiritually, for a karmic reason, I chose my parents. And I'm thankful for everything I had to go through. And I want to really help my clients. And I think there's something even bigger waiting for me. I'm 38 years old, and maybe it is to work with addicts. Maybe it is to work with young athletes who do
Hmm.
struggle at home,
Hmm.
something like that. But I would love to just continue this journey. Helping people, I know, is my calling. And I love to help people when it comes to bettering themselves and their health and, their mindset and stuff. Um, but I know there's more for me. And
Yeah.
I'm excited. I'm just excited, and I'm grateful. I truly am grateful. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, I didn't have plans to become a trainer. I didn't really know what my plan was, but I did graduate college with a public health degree from Hofstra University and a minor in sociology. So I loved working with people, and I loved learning about people in society and also like health. How I was going to tie it all together, I wasn't sure. And I had a friend who worked in Equinox in corporate in the city in New York, and she was like, "You would be a great, phenomenal trainer." She was like, "Why don't you give it a go?" Knowing that I was the captain of my cross country and track teams also in college, so I was taking on that leadership role
Yeah.
already. And I gave it a shot because honestly, I was like, well, it was 2008. The economy was in the dumps,
Yeah.
and no one really knew. We
Yeah.
graduated from college, and there were no jobs.
Yeah.
Uh, So the millennials, we were kind of screwed, especially that year. So I was like, let me do this for a little while. And I wound up loving it. And it took me to the city, and it just expanded my world because I met such, again, just wonderful, intelligent, driven, ambitious people. Um, and still, I decided to take some classes, like philosophy classes, because I wanted to continue to learn and understand. And at this point, this was probably my early 20s, mid 20s, I still had this rocky, tumultuous relationship with my mother.
Mm-hmm.
My sister, she's older than me, but we never were super close. I was kind of like, out of the three of us, I don't want to sound cocky, but kind of like the favorite from my grandmother's perspective. My grandmother did love me the most. And I was the only one to go to college. Teachers loved, everyone knew me. So I was like the athlete,
Yeah.
the star athlete.
Yeah.
So living in kind of my shadow, I think for the both of them was a little tough. My sister tried college, dropped out. My brother never tried, and he was younger than me. So, I think, where was I going with that? What was I saying?
So you loved the training. You got into the training. You met some great people, and
Yes,
you at this point you
yes.
still weren't getting along with your mom.
Right. So I was taking the philosophy classes, still working on myself. And,
Right.
you know, the guidance counselor therapy in high school really gave me an outlet to see someone, constantly work with someone, to
Yeah.
manage my emotions, to
Mm-hmm.
sift through all the muddiness that comes up just being a human being.
Yeah.
So I was like, I really still want to talk to people. Like, I didn't have that in college. I wanted to get back to speaking to either a therapist, but financials came back into play. And
Yeah.
I wound up in my early to mid 20s when I was working at Equinox. I got hired there to work as a trainer in the city. I started bartering with a therapist who was actually she was a hypnotherapist, and we
Uh,
worked on EFT tapping, hypnotherapy, and role playing. And a lot of my parent stuff came up, especially with my father and my mother. But her and I were working specifically with my father because at this point, again, he was just awkwardly still in my life. I didn't know how to place him. When I would see him, I think I cut him out um, until my later 20s. And then, yeah, I randomly saw him in the city one day, and I was on an MTA bus, and I saw him jotting out across the MTA bus because he was a truck driver. And I'm like, that's my father.
mhm.
And I'm like, is the universe giving me a sign? Maybe I need to get off the bus and go talk to him. And I did, but I'll get back to that. So I want to just clear up my mother first. I wound up being able to truly forgive my mother by taking these philosophy classes and really understanding it's as simple as like she tried the best she could. And the
Yeah.
trauma and the abuse she imposed on us was the same exact abuse and trauma she went through.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for the time we spent in my grandmother's basement because the grandmother I knew was this gentle, loving, caring soul, like that I could
Yeah.
never imagine. But we saw that side of her that was just almost demonic. It was insane. It was just like this different woman. And that is when in my mid 20s, I was like, that's who she dealt with growing up. And that's
Exactly,
why she is
because
the
that
way
was
she
your
is.
mom's mom, right?
Correct.
It was your mom's mom. Because I was going
Maternal.
to say, yeah. So that makes complete sense that
Correct.
you can see what
Correct.
your mother you had a glimpse into your mother's past.
Yes. Yes. But with the therapy, with the counseling throughout my middle school years, my high school years, I had enough foresight
Yeah.
and awareness without all that really strong foundation.
Yeah.
I think it would have been harder. Like I
Oh
don't want
yeah.
to, take somebody like my sister born under the same roof. She's still dealing, and I see it with resentment and anger with my
Yeah.
mother because she just has not done the years and the decades worth of work that I
Yeah.
have been fortunate to have done.
Yeah.
So, you know, I was able to truly forgive my mother. And I remember the moment it happened. And I did have some other experiences with psychedelics, with meditation. I later
Mm-hmm.
found when I started meditating on a regular basis, along with the philosophy, school philosophy, going to these classes, and just really taking like really abstract like ideas, like what is love, right? And just like dissecting that at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, going inward, doing the internal work, meditation, occasionally experimenting with psychedelics, expanding my mind, and really coming to a new conclusion of what is love. Because I didn't, who wants to carry around anger and resentment?
Yeah.
It only weighs you down, you know?
Yeah.
And she was still somebody in my life. And, you know, it was actually my brother who I watched start to call her on a regular basis and say things like "I love you." We never heard
Mm-hmm.
that growing up from either of them.
Mm.
We never got any kind of hugs. We never got
Yeah.
any kind of support. You know, she would sometimes say, "I'm proud of you," but there was no affection of any kind, physical affection. There was never "I love you." So it was almost like, whoa, it was jolting. And to hear my little brother
Oh.
say that, as simple as when he hung up, "I love you." And he started with me and my sister. He started saying it. And then I was like, it sounds weird, but we started saying it back to him. It was
Oh.
easy. It was easy between the three of us, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and um, and so I heard him start to say it to my mother. And at that time, with the philosophy, with all these other means to have breakthroughs like the meditation, I slowly brought myself to say it to her. And
Mm.
I did. I was like, I do love her. I do forgive her. So it kind of, I remember the moment it happened. It was in school philosophy. Like it was the love class, and I was just holding on. I'm like, yeah, but what if somebody has abused you so much, and there's so much anger, and they're like, and she looked at me. She was just like, she's still love. She is still love, and it was just such an epitome moment.
Yeah.
Um, and so it doesn't, I don't think, happen overnight, but it was the
Yeah.
culmination of all these things that brought me to a place of final forgiveness of my
Mm-hmm.
mother, but also being open to it, being
Yeah.
open to it, because fast forward to dealing with my father. uh, it took many moons to, I don't know if I still forgive him.
Yeah.
Perhaps I do, but I had to cut him off because, whoa, let me kind of back up here. Um, well, I would say, so it was like a weight off my shoulder once I realized, wow, I'm able to forgive my mother, and I'm able to look at her as a human
Mm-hmm.
being who did the best she could. And it improved my relationship with my brother. It improved my relationship with her. Me and my brother started bonding over things, like kind of poking fun at her, but just like laughing because she's like kind of cute in her own way. Um, and it just life felt so much easier not carrying around that stuff.
I know, it's liberating, isn't it?
It was completely liberating, and I wanted to get to a space with my father with it. I
Yeah.
wanted to see if it was possible with him. So I actually had a talk with him in my mid 20s, like to try to understand. I wanted to see if he understood why he did the things he did, and I wanted to
Yeah.
poke to see what the hell happened to you.
Yeah.
What happened to you?
Exactly.
Who abused
Exactly.
you?
Yep.
Who touched you
Mm-hmm.
inappropriately? Who was inappropriate with you? And the only kind of relationship I had with him at that time was seeing him once every 6 months in the city when he would come in driving his truck. After the one time I saw him jogging across the MTA bus, I was like, this is a sign. The universe wants him back in my life. So I tried, but the extent of that relationship consisted of him just popping into the city once every 6 months, giving me $100, which was okay, but okay. And then just talking about himself for 15 minutes, and then that's it. He never called on Christmas. He never called on our birthdays. Like he just was pretty much still very absent. So at that time, I was like, I want to forgive him. I want to
Mm-hmm.
get to a place where I got to with mom. So I tried to talk to him one time, and it just went completely over his head. He doesn't have that capacity. He didn't make any kind of recollection. And I said to myself, well, you
Mm.
know what? I tried, and I know I tried, and now I can say, God forbid something happens to him, because that became like kind of like a mission. I wanted to say, if my parents died,
Yeah.
am I going to be okay knowing I did everything I could to kind of just understand and make amends.
Right.
So having that conversation was vital because it made me realize I did try. I did truly try. And if something does happen to him, I know, I did my part here.
Yeah.
And throughout the 20s into my mid 30s, it stayed pretty much like that. Very open door, but he was never walking through it. He was just very absent still. Um, and it wasn't until almost 3 years ago, my brother fell off. My brother battled addiction from his mid-teens up until his 33 years of life, and
Oh.
he was like a very big part of my life. I did a lot for that kid, and I will always love him to death. And I knew he was struggling, and I started struggling because I felt alone in helping him um, become better, become sober. And it became my sister and I's responsibility in a way. My mother couldn't handle it because she was still dealing with her own addictions.
Mhm.
My father was absent. So my brother became kind of like a child to me and my sister. More so my sister because she's 6 years older than him, where I'm two. So I did kind of give him a little more tough love. But he didn't stop using, and he was very reckless. And he came to see me in Los Angeles, February of 21, no, 2020. And I knew he was in deep shit. Excuse my language. I was like, this kid's not well. And, he's gone in and out of rehabs. I sent him to the Coast Guard when he was 16, 17. I know I did everything I could for him.
Yeah.
I tried to be a good role model. My sister did it in a different way where she kind of allowed him. She gave him money. I didn't do that because I was like,
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
have money to give you.
That's enabling.
And enabling, yeah.
Yeah.
And in a way, like I did too, because I just, I enabled in different ways. But he kind of pushed me away because I was kind of the nagging mother. I
Yeah.
was like, what are you doing? Who are you hanging out with? Blah, blah, blah. You gotta blah, blah, blah. And my sister was more like, you have to do this, but here's money.
Yeah.
So her and I were kind of good cop, bad cop. And I think all the while, he didn't get that support. He didn't get that love from no teachers, no guidance counselors. He was
Oh.
getting into trouble pretty early. He got himself out of the Coast Guard. Once he got in, he only served a year, and then somehow he got released because he hated it, and he just fell into more trouble
Mhm.
around drugs. But he went in and out of rehab, and about I would say 4 years ago, before he really came to LA and I saw how bad he was, he came out of rehab one of the stints, and I was so proud of him because he looked good. He had gained weight, and me and my sister were really supportive. We tried our best to be supportive, and it was my sister's daughter's, my niece. It was her baptism, and both my parents were going to be there, which was odd. Like, again, we kept that door open for my father, but it was confusing. But we
Yeah.
did leave it open, so
Yeah.
when he wanted to, he would come in.
Yeah.
And my parents have no awareness to anything, and my brother had just gotten out of rehab, and I remember they were sitting at a table, and my brother was wedged right in between them, fresh out of rehab, and my mother and my father both are having a beer. They're drinking, and I'm looking at my sister, and I'm like, I was pissed. I was
Yeah.
annoyed. Here we are being the parents to the parents, but
Yeah.
also like trying to protect my little brother. Like this
Mhm.
was the whole, scene growing up, always trying to protect him. And I can tell he was very much uncomfortable. And this is one of the proudest moments of my life. I went to the bathroom, so I was up, and I got back to the table, and he was gone. I'm like, where did he go? My focus was always on him. I was always just concerned about him. And I'm like, where did he go? And he was outside, and he texted me. He was like, can you come outside?
Mm.
Yeah. So I go outside, and he's like, one thing they teach you in rehab is that you can't control the environment that you're in, but you can control yourself. He's like, I'm not comfortable. He's like, and they tell you, you can control yourself, and find somebody you trust and let them know what you're doing. And he's like, so you're my person I trust right now, and
Oh.
I don't want to be here. And I was like, I'm proud of you. Let's go.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
we left. I told my sister, she wasn't, but I was pissed at my parents who had no awareness. I had to reprimand them.
Yeah.
And, I left with my brother. But it was a very proud moment where I was like, I'm proud of you for sticking to your guns and
Yep.
for advocating for yourself.
Yes.
And fast forward a couple years later, he came to LA, and I thought, okay, if he's getting on a plane, he's not using. But it became pretty apparent to me when he was in LA. I was like, he was into opioids and
Mm.
heroin, which is completely dangerous.
Yeah.
And
Very
but it
dangerous.
became apparent to me when he came to LA. I was like, it's alcohol. It's the alcohol that is like the number one, like, thing, that substance that gets him to that point to use. And I was like, he needs total rehab again. And I felt like a kid screaming, trying to shake everyone. I called my sister crying out because it was a mess. He came here, he was completely unhinged. He drank, and I was like, this is not my brother anymore. And I recognized that. I'm like, he's in trouble. He's going to kill himself. And I called my sister hysterical. I was like, we need to do something. At this point, she had her daughter. She was like, he's not my problem anymore, Amanda. Like, he's just, and I understood because she
Yeah.
did so much for him,
Yeah.
especially financially. So she had a child now, so she really didn't have the capacity to help him, a grown
Yeah.
ass man. Um, so I was like, oh man. So then I told my mom. I told her point blank. I'm like, you're gonna lose your son if you don't do something about this. We need to do something about this. I
Mm-hmm.
told my father, your son's in trouble. Your son is going to kill him. No one heard me. No one heard me. No one took it seriously. I had to do something, and I'm only one person. And I kept my brother in my life. I tried to prioritize him. I tried to reprimand him. I tried to be that nagging mother he never had. Nothing ever worked. But with the philosophy school, with these modes to enlightenment like meditation and my
Mm-hmm.
psychedelic work, I realized the only way I can potentially save my brother is through love, right? And I tried that, and the last straw, which I did not want to do, which it kind of was it though. I was like, this is the only way. I was like, I love you. I love you to death. You know that. It's not about, not loving you. I'm doing this because I love you, but I have to cut you out.
Yeah.
I
Tough
have to
love.
cut you out of my life because I want you here. And if you want to have me in your life, this is what I need you to do within the next 8 weeks. I need you to contact a therapist. I gave him a list. I said, I need you to start working out regularly. I will help you. And I will also guide you with any other, mode that will help you. But you need to contact a therapist in the next 8 weeks, and we need to get you on some kind of program and protocol for your physical
Mm-hmm.
well-being and nutrition.
Yeah.
He said, all right, I got you. I was like, I don't want to cut you out. Don't make me do
Yeah.
this. And, 8 weeks goes by, and I noticed the phone calls, the text messages stopped, and I was like, he's falling off again. And I said, I hate to do this, Paul, but I have to see my way out of your life right now. And it's not because I don't love you. I'm doing it because I do love you. And he was upset. He was
Mm-hmm.
really upset.
Mm-hmm.
This was in late 2020, moving into 2021, and I started warming up to him a little bit, but still not at the same capacity for the holidays that year in late 2020. Because obviously we were going to see each other for the holidays, but it wasn't that relationship where we were calling each other because I made myself that boundary. I
Yeah.
said,
Smart.
you know, and Thanksgiving came around that year, and I hosted it at the apartment I was in New York, and it was the last time I saw my brother, and he was not well, and he was so incapacitated he couldn't even be present, and I was like, my brother's in trouble again, an opportunity for us to come together, have another intervention, because we did. Me and my sister, we put on interventions for him in the past, and they work short term, but then, after rehab, addicts go back if they're not in, a more supportive state and environment. Um, so yeah, it was the last time I saw him alive. And,
Mm.
Christmas came around a few weeks later, and we had this really bad snowstorm coming in New York on the East Coast. And oddly, it was an odd phone call I got around 11:15 p.m. at night, and he sounded just erratic. He just sounded manic. And I knew, again, like, his mental health was deteriorating. Something like it, the drugs do change your
Yeah.
mind
Yep.
after some time.
Changes the
So me and
chemistry.
my sister, yep,
Hmm.
yep. And so I didn't know if he was coming from a place of manic likeness, mania. And but he said, I'm driving back on the BQE. Somebody just shot me. Somebody's shooting at me. I'm like, well, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, I just wanted to tell you, like, I love you. And it was really scary. I'm like, okay. I'm like, please be safe. I'm like, are you safe? Did you get like plates? Nothing. He didn't get plates. And the last thing he said was like, we talked, because at that point I was moving to Los Angeles, but I hadn't found a place. Actually, I had signed the lease that day. I signed the lease to come out here for the apartment that day. And he said to me, I'm happy you're getting out of New York. I'm excited for you. Let's have lunch before you go. And I said, absolutely, I'm open to that. And he was like, I love you. And I was like, I love you too. And he died that night. He overdosed.
Oh God, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Mm,
Oh
thank
God,
you.
that's tough.
Yeah. Yeah, I was one of the last people to talk to him.
God.
But it wasn't, it was actually uh, that Sunday when, we couldn't get a hold of him. And, you know, the, the, the search started, and it wasn't unusual for him to not respond and him to go MIA, because that was his like MO. And we had some people stop over there, and they found him. But the most horrible, difficult thing about the whole process was having to break the news to my sister and my mother.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah. So after that, you know, the dust settled, and still I left the door open for my father. Having compassion and empathy for him. Um,
Yeah.
Maybe thinking he would come around, after losing his only
Yeah.
son. Maybe something would click in him to change his life too. So I was like, maybe this is it. Maybe he's going to come around. And he didn't change. But again, I left that door open. And over the next year and a half, what was the first thing I got a message on Facebook, and it was from some random unknown that I didn't know. And that's not unusual though. And I do have an automatic message system set up on Facebook that's like, thank you for reaching out. Like, if you're interested in training, blah, blah. So this person responded, is Danny Edel your father? And I was like, immediately, I was like, listen, hon, I have nothing to do with him. Please don't involve me. And at this point, I still shared his last name. And she wound up sending me nudes of him. And I was like, what? I was like, she's like, he's sending these around the internet. And I immediately blocked her. I like
Yeah. Like, why do I care
had like
about that?
a panic attack. I called my sister. I'm like, this is horrible. Like, this just happened to me. I was like, and this is like inside a year after my brother passed. So
Oh,
I was like
geez.
still in this fragile
Yeah.
state. I was like, what is he doing? Like, I'm going to ignore this. But he was always inappropriate. Like, if I'm being completely, not only with me, but with my underage friends. He would say really
Mm.
inappropriate things to my underage friends. So it didn't confuse me or surprise me that he was doing shady stuff on the
Yeah.
internet and sending stuff around to minors. But again, I just didn't want to deal with it at that point.
Didn't need to.
Holidays were around the corner. A year passes, and something similar happened, but it came straight from him. I downloaded Telegram to talk to a company that deals with psychedelics. So we speak sometimes on Signal and Telegram and stuff like that. And I guess your notifications go off when one of your contacts joins Telegram,
Hmm.
and he must have got a notification that I was on. And I get a message from him and I see his username profile picture. It is him sprawled out naked like a Victoria's Secret effing model, hovering.
Ew.
And I go, what the F? I freak out and I blocked him.
God.
And at this point, I was like, I have to rid myself of this because I forgot to mention when that Facebook profile picture woman came through, she also was like, your father owes me money. She came after me. She tried to blackmail me. She goes, this is your company. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. She started posting on my company
Oh my
page.
goodness.
And that's when I was like, I'm done with him.
Yeah.
So it was the culmination after my brother passed of these inappropriate things happening on the internet and memories flooding back of him doing inappropriate things, saying inappropriate things to my friends when we were 13 years old, my sister's friends when they were 17, him having just absolutely no shame, being a womanizer, being completely inappropriate with me. And, you know, that was it. That was the last straw. So I've completely changed my last name, and it's been very liberating, to say the
Mm-hmm.
least, to just not
Mm-hmm.
have that baggage
Mm-hmm.
attached to me anymore. To start new, and also to make the decision to know again, because at one point I did try to understand where he came from. I
Right.
did try to make amends and have empathy, but at this point you're not going to continue to ruin my life, you know? And I'm not mad, you know. I think
Yeah.
people, you know, they say your parents are your parents, though. You need to keep your parents in your life. I think we should do things in our power to make amends with our parents and have respect. But if they are jeopardizing your life still as adults, you do have the freedom to cut ties.
You
You
know
do.
what? One of the best things that was ever said to me, because I struggled with that with my brother, because I had gotten to the point where I had forgiven him,
Mm-hmm.
but I did not have him in my life. And the reason why I chose not to have him in my life is because he went after my son. And I was like, oh, hell no. Oh,
Yeah.
hell no. We're
Yeah.
stopping that right now. So I cut him off.
Of course.
And you know, and I struggled with that because I thought, oh, I'm a terrible person. And at the time I was a
Yep.
practicing Christian, you know, and as a Christian, you shouldn't, you know,
Mm.
it's your brother. You need to have a relationship with him. And I had gone to this workshop, which I'm now doing myself, but it's a workshop where, and in that workshop, we were talking about forgiveness and the importance of
Mm-hmm.
forgiveness. And the
Mm-hmm.
one thing she said, and it was liberating for me is, you know, we're called to forgive them. This is Christian talk. We're called to
Sure.
forgive them. But if they are still being abusive, we are not called to have them in our life still. And I just
That's it.
remember like it literally took my breath
Mm.
away. Like I felt this release of like,
Yes.
okay, I'm not being a bad person because I didn't do it because, oh, you're a jerk.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't want you in my life. I did it for a very valid reason. And
Mm-hmm.
and it's true. It doesn't matter who they are in your life. If they are still harming you, you
Yep.
absolutely do not have to have them in your life. You shouldn't, because like you
Yes.
said, like you don't have to worry anymore about, is he going to show
Mm-hmm.
up again? You know,
Right.
and when he shows up,
Right.
what's
Is
he
he
going to
doing
do?
right? Is he doing inappropriate things on the internet that somehow I'm responsible for? Like,
Yeah,
please.
you're pulling me into your craziness, and you know, and
Right.
so yeah, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And you're right. I think that we do, when especially when it comes to our family, we do need to make that extra effort to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to make the
Mm-hmm.
relationship work. But it is not our
Yes.
responsibility to make that
Right.
relationship work. It takes two people.
Yes.
And if that
Yes.
person is still abusive,
Mm-hmm.
you should
Mm-hmm.
not have them in your life. And you can wish
Yes.
them well. Like right now, I can think about my brother. I love my brother. I do care
Mm-hmm.
about him. I
Mm-hmm.
absolutely wish him the best. I also know
Mm-hmm.
he's dangerous in my life.
Right. Right. Yes. It's that simple.
It
It's
really
that
is.
simple. If they're still causing you trauma, heartache, you know, abuse, you got to cut it out,
Right, right.
you
Because
know?
it's not going to get better. Your dad is not going
Correct.
to change. You
He's not going
know,
to change.
he's
No.
not going to change.
It,
And the more
correct.
you're around, especially with this kind of stuff, you would get pulled
Right.
into his crap.
Yes. Yes. Yep. And, you know, in a way, I protected my niece because my sister was still trying to make it work with him for a while, even after
Ooh.
her daughter was born. And I was like, after the second round of the nudes came through, I said, "You want your daughter around this?" I was like, that was the first thing I said.
Yeah.
Do
Ooh,
not put my niece in front of her. And
that gives
she's
me the
since
chills.
then she's removed herself and her daughter from his life as well.
Was your sister sexually abused and your brother?
Unclear. My brother was, because I did many moons ago raise it, brought it up to the two of them at once at the same time. Probably looking back, it wasn't an appropriate way to do it,
Right.
especially like together. And for a while, I was gaslit with my sister and my mother. They were like, "What are you talking about? That's just the way he is. You know, he's weird." But even like my brother though was the only one who kind of had my back. He'd validate me more,
Mm.
because my brother was abused, and I remember my brother was abused in front of me. So that's also why my
Oh.
brother turned to drugs
Oh,
and
yeah.
really, and had so much anger and needed to just, zone out and just remove himself, disassociate using those drugs. Thank God I said in the beginning, I use sports. Sports saved my life, because I
Yes.
probably would have went down the same road as
Mm-hmm.
my brother,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, it's interesting. The three of you are raised in the same family by the same parents,
Mm-hmm.
the same kind of
Mm-hmm.
conditions, and it's
Yep.
interesting how we do make different choices. And I remember
Yes.
I didn't do the heavy drugs because I was afraid of them, because I watched my
Mm-hmm.
brother, he's 7 years older than me. So
Mm-hmm.
I watched him, like he started, I think like in eighth grade, so you're like 13 years old.
Mm-hmm.
He started doing
Mm-hmm.
heavy duty drugs. He didn't start with marijuana. I remember, I think he said he started with like reds, like I think they were it was pills back then, and it
Yeah.
was, I don't know
Yeah.
what it did, but I remember him saying, I started with that, and and so I watched him come home being inebriated and, throwing up
Mm.
everywhere and acting crazy, and it was fearful. It was really scary. And so
Yes.
on one sense, I'm kind of glad I experienced that, because honestly, that's where I would have gone. That's exactly,
Yeah.
I know I would have.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there was a time where I was dabbling with alcohol, and I talk about it on my
Mm-hmm.
podcast, and I quit for a while. I drink alcohol now, but it's different.
Mm-hmm.
But then
Mm-hmm.
it had a different, I had a different attitude towards it. And I know I was self-medicating, but I didn't get drunk. I didn't get drunk.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't lose
Mm-hmm.
control. I would
Mm-hmm.
get just a nice buzz going to get that edge off,
Mm-hmm.
and that was
Mm-hmm.
good.
Mm-hmm.
I did not allow
Yep.
myself to get drunk, because I didn't want to lose control, because that's what I
Right.
witnessed. I witnessed my brother, and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to be like that. So,
Sure.
but
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you honestly, I don't think I would be here. Honest to God, I would not
Right.
be here.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I know. I started drinking pretty early myself, and I've been a cannabis user, but nothing hard. Hard
Yeah,
drugs really,
they
really
scared.
scared me.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I did like, the worst I did was like, I did cocaine a couple of times, and
Mm-hmm.
at first, like, ooh, this feels kind of cool, and then like my heart was racing, and
Yeah. Exactly.
I felt like I was losing control. I was like,
Sure.
I
Mm-hmm.
just can't do this. I
Right.
mean, I'm so
Yes.
sensitive to medications anyway. It doesn't take much for
Yep.
me anyway, but
Yep. Yep.
I had other things that I did, and that's one of the things we're going to
Mm-hmm.
kind of talk about a little bit, is the coping behaviors. And I know for me,
Mm-hmm.
eating, you're talking about eating
Mm-hmm.
healthy and everything. I
Mm-hmm.
learned at a very young age to stuff myself with food. That's what I did.
Sure. Absolutely. That's a very common trauma response. And that's also something I work with clients on: eating disorders, disorder eating habits, binge eating. Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was interesting, because I remember back then eating and thinking, I'm not hungry. Why am I doing this? But I just did it
Mm-hmm.
anyway. And then of course I put weight on, and then that just started a whole nother
Sure. Yes.
road to go down. And it took, and I carried that behavior into my adult life. And I think I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to do a post at some point, that I'm going to do the pictures of me through the years of how much I changed,
Mm-hmm.
and,
Mm-hmm.
you can see my weight gain, you can see my weight loss, you can see my weight gain, you can see my weight loss, and you can see
Mm.
me changing through the years. It's really interesting, because I physically, not just my weight, but the way I look is different. And I'm actually, this is kind of sound kind of crazy, but I'm actually going back to the look that I had when I was a little girl. It's like I'm going back to the little Lisa.
Interesting.
It's
Yeah.
really
Yeah. Yeah.
interesting.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's very telling. That's very, very telling.
it is. And
Yeah.
because I got the picture over there on my desk and I use it in my my workshop and I use it in
Hmm.
the podcast. And I looked at it and
Hmm.
there's several people that have looked and they're like, oh my God, I could totally tell that's you. Like that's you now. And and
Uh-huh.
I had enough people say that to me there where I went, hmm. And then I started looking at the
Hmm.
pictures and then I see this evolution of me. And it's just crazy.
Mm.
So
Hmm.
anyway, I'm just saying,
Yes.
there's different, behaviors and mine unfortunately was the eating.
100%.
Hmm.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think awareness to our coping mechanisms is really, really powerful.
Yeah.
Once you have the awareness, like you're able to say, like, okay, I see that I'm using food as a scapegoat. I see that I'm using alcohol or drugs or sex or working or shopping or whatever
Yeah.
it is, gambling.
Yeah.
Literally, it's human beings. We want to feel good. Our brain is going to always look for ways to feel good. And trauma, unresolved trauma is going to, is storing itself in your body, in
Yep.
your nervous system.
Yep.
But on a subconscious level, that stuff is going to come out. And I saw it with my brother, and I see it with myself still to this day. And that's why I have to work out. It is
Me
still my
too.
number one thing. It's not running anymore. But the coping mechanism back then for me was running. It was that
Hmm.
high I got from
Hmm.
running. It was the ability to leave my house for hours on end, which was great. Saying I'm going for a run, but I would go for a run, but then I would also stop with my friends and hang
Yeah.
out. Like it
Yeah.
was my way out physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. So that became my number one coping mechanism, running. After that, I definitely relied on drinking at some points in my
Hmm.
life, 100%. I was pretty young drinking, and I would say 16 years old, and that definitely throughout college, I was a heavy drinker.
Yeah.
And then it was more cannabis.
Hmm.
Um, so you have to be able to recognize what you are abusing, because substances, a la carte, aren't necessarily inherently bad.
Right.
It's how we use them.
Right.
So people with more unresolved trauma have a more likelihood of abusing these things, these substances. So other modes that I've used to cope: meditation,
Yeah.
therapy,
Writing.
somatic therapy, writing. Right, when I was young, it was writing, it was
Hmm.
poetry, it was
Hmm.
reading.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, I don't really have those habits anymore. I wish I did. I'm very much distracted like the rest of the world with my phone.
Yeah.
But back then, it was my scapegoat. It was running, it was writing, it was reading. So those three pillars really, really were such a very important part of my evolution and just ways to cope growing up. Meditation, I found in my mid 20s, thank God. With that therapist, I found also in my early 20s the hypnotherapist, EFT tapping. I'm
Hmm.
still a very big fan of it. Uh, and now I work with a somatic therapist who still does, like, somatic therapy. It could be as simple as shaking,
Yeah.
and that's
Yep.
something I teach with my binge eating clients. Because if we can use other modalities instead of that food in that moment, practice the pause, shake, dance, right? Getting into your body instead
Yep.
of being up here and disassociated.
Right.
So really learning this stuff has been so empowering, not only for
Yeah.
myself, but for my clients as
Yeah.
well.
Let me
Mm-hmm.
ask you this because I think
Yep.
about this. So one of your coping mechanisms was running, and then you
Yep.
talked about somatic exercises. And I know, and in my research and in my own experience, that movement
Mm-hmm.
is helps get the trauma out of your body, right?
Absolutely.
It can even be
Mm-hmm.
dancing, and
Yep.
and like I was
Mm-hmm.
always active. Like in high school, I was in marching band. I roller skated. I hiked. I was
Mm-hmm.
really active. Even in
Mm-hmm.
my young adult life, I was very much into working out. Even though my weight fluctuated, I always worked out. So, do you think that maybe that helped us get the trauma out of our body? You with running,
Mm-hmm.
me with working out or dancing or getting that movement in. I was always moving. Isn't that crazy? I mean, even though I had
Mm-hmm.
weight on and everything like that, I was always moving.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And to this day, my number one stress reliever is some kind of movement. It's either getting on my Peloton, going for a walk, going
There
to
it
work.
is.
It's
Yeah.
something like that. That is my number one stress reliever. And I'll let you answer the question, but I just want to say one more thing. And for 5 years, I couldn't work out because I had major back stuff and I had 2 back surgeries. So walking a little bit was as much as I could do. And I cannot tell you the stress that put me under. Never mind the whole back issue, the pain and dealing with that every day. And I refused to take pain pills. So I was just dealing with the pain. I didn't even have my stress reliever anymore. And I felt that. So do you think that for you and I, and for others out there that were maybe really active in their younger years, that maybe helped us?
100%, without a doubt.
Right?
Without a doubt, yes. And, that's why kids who are, born into chaos and they don't have the means to, get out necessarily like I did, or have, strong adults or sane adults in their life, running is free, getting out and doing something physical, dancing, it could be free. Like, just getting out and moving your body. 100%. I believe, the body keeps a score, and that's a book by, I forget his name, but
it's a long name. Yeah.
Yes.
It's so true. I know. I've listened to it. Yeah.
The body keeps a score. So if we can somehow physically transmute that energy and, it lives in our body, because if not, it is going to surface some way, shape, or form through disease. So if you can physically move your body, I mean, one of the best ways to get through depression is to exercise,
right?
So it's being stored in the body. It lives in the body. So yes, 100% moving as a youngster, really being able to channel your emotions through movement, because a lot of the time you can't articulate how you're feeling, especially as a young kid in, an environment that's very traumatic. You can't articulate what's happening, especially if you don't have sane parents or any sane adults in your life to tell you, hey, this is not normal what you're going through. But movement could absolutely help transmute that energy and that trauma.
I thought about that, in all the studying I've done, and talking about movement and how important that is. And I kind of reflected on myself, and I thought, I've always been active, always, all my life, even with my weight up and down, I was always doing something. And as a kid, I was really active. I mean, we were outside all the time, because I wanted to be at my friend's house. And so like in the summertime, we were literally in the pool from 10 in the morning till 10 at night. I had long blonde hair that was greener than green from the pool, but I was always, out of the house, and I always wanted to always want to go and do. And so I thought about that, and I thought, I wonder, it makes sense that it would. Why? I mean, at the time I wasn't thinking about, okay, I got to go outside and run because I've got to get this trauma out of my body. But my body doesn't know any difference. It doesn't know. It just knows I'm moving.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and it will lead to other things. Like, my mother was never a health advocate. There was always soda in the house, and we drink soda, right? But I remember coming back from my runs and being like, this soda is just not quenching my thirst.
Exactly.
I'm switching to water, so it's going to lead to other healthier habits just naturally.
Right.
You're going to feel better physically. You're going to feel better emotionally, lighter. And then naturally, things are just going to unfold in a more healthy way.
Exactly. It's funny about the water, because I've always, all my life, been a huge water drinker. Huge. It's just always. Sodas made me more thirsty. And then I'd go over to my friend's house and they would have Kool-Aid. And I remember making the Kool-Aid and pouring 2 cups of sugar into the gallon jug.
Crazy, yeah.
And I would drink it and I go, but now I'm more thirsty. I drink juice. I would be more thirsty. So I've always been a huge water. I am not kidding. I've never really measured it. I definitely drink well over a gallon of water a day. And it's not conscious. It's just a habit, and it's something I know. I know that's another thing that's helped my body. And I've even thought maybe that's even helped me keep from getting disease, is because I'm filtering my body constantly all the time with water. Constantly. Yes. I mean, even in the middle of the night, if I get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, I stop by, I got my water glass right there. I take a big chug and I go right back to bed. It's just always been a habit. And it's like, I get thirsty, and the only thing that'll quench my thirst is water. So and you're right. And it does make you more aware, because if you start paying attention to these little habits that you start changing, you can start feeling the difference. When you start paying attention to your body and having that self-awareness on your body, you'll feel it. Here's an example.
100%.
We have a McDonald's up here where I live, and it's been closed for 3 years. It burned down 3 years ago or something. It was just this big, I live in a little town, so it's like this big, scuttlebutt about McDonald's, right? Yeah. So it finally opens, and And so I said, honey, this is like last week. I said, honey, God, wait, I don't even know the last time I ate at McDonald's. And everybody was talking about it on next door. So I said, okay, let's go do it. Let's do it. Let's go have McDonald's. Oh,
Big mistake.
I suffered. We had it for
For
lunch, thank God.
days.
We didn't do it for dinner. We didn't do it for dinner,
Okay.
thank God. We did it for
Yeah.
lunch. I
Yeah.
suffered. I said, oh God, we're not doing that again. And nothing against McDonald's. I'm not, it's just, it was just, yeah. So, and my point is, in the old days, my old days, not paying attention, and I would have ran to McDonald's without even thinking about
Yeah.
it,
Thinking
and wouldn't
twice.
even
Right.
pay attention afterwards how crappy I felt.
Right. Right. Yep.
So
Yep.
it's just it's the baby steps that we take that will lead to big
Yes.
changes in our lives, right?
100%. It's a catalyst effect, it's a domino effect. Like one good choice will lead you to more good choices.
Right. Right. And
So, yeah.
and the thing that heads that up is the self-awareness. And I talk about that all the time on my podcast, but there's so much power in having self-awareness. It changes everything in your life. And I know it has for me. And mine's still expanding. I mean, I know I haven't, right. I'm a human being. I'm going to be on this journey until I take my last breath. But it's, the more I become aware, the more empowering it is for me.
100%. Yeah. Never stop learning, never stop growing. And yeah, the awareness is the most empowering thing. It truly is. Yeah, all the therapists I work with now, they're just like, you are so self-aware. I'm like, thanks. It's the trauma. Thanks. The years and decades of therapy.
Yeah. Well, you started young with the self-awareness. I mean, obviously you started very
9 years old. I had that mirror. 9 years old. Most people don't have that.
No.
Most people don't have that.
No.
9 years old, somebody sent me to go talk to a professional.
Thank God they did. Thank God. And that was something I was mentioning before, and I think that listeners can identify. I mean, I hope that more people can identify with your story than mine, that they did have adults in the life and they had teachers and counselors and that stepped up and helped, and in my case, and I know there's unfortunately a lot out there that didn't have anybody, and it's interesting. And it's not a poor me, and I don't know why. We were very involved with the family. My mom and my dad had a lot of family friends. People saw stuff, and then I lost my mom when I was 16 and nobody stepped up. It was the weirdest thing. Even at school, like I was completely alone at school. My counselor never called me in to see, how are you doing? The teachers never reached out to me. I was out of school for a week after she died and went back to school, and I made it through, like, I think the first class, and then the second class, one of the kids said some snarky thing to me, and that was it. I lost it and started crying. Only students came after me and helped me. No adults. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And we could say it was like a different time, but I'm sure there are kids that have a similar experience now.
Yeah. And I think it's true. I think it definitely was a different time. But I just, for those teachers out there that do help the kids, and I've got teachers in my family, and I hear the love they have for the children, and they are constantly helping them. And it's so refreshing to hear that, because no child should ever have to feel alone, especially when they're in a traumatic situation and they have no one to talk to. So I'm glad you had that. That was a lifesaver for you.
100%. Yes, I agree. It completely altered my world, the trajectory of my entire life. My coaches, my teachers, my guidance counselors.
Yeah. So why don't you share with the audience how they could reach out to you if they wanted to contact you for maybe some coaching or some therapy,
some holistic
or
coaching, nutrition. Yep. You guys can find me at my website, which is amandahartwellness.com. You could also find me on Instagram and Facebook at Hart Wellness, HART Wellness.
And we'll have all those links and everything on the YouTube. And then one last question. What would you like to leave our listeners with?
Let's see. Don't give up.
Yeah.
Don't give up. When there is a will, there is a way. And as long as you just keep on keeping on every single day, just focusing on just being 1% better.
Yeah.
Progress is not linear. Growth is not linear, and just keep on keeping on. Don't ever give up.
Yeah. Good words. Very, very wise words. And yes, it's those baby steps, like I was saying. Just take one
That's
step at a
it.
time. Just one step at a
Yep.
time. You know,
Yes.
I can
Absolutely.
remember sometimes feeling like all I can do is just take the next breath. That's all I can do
That's it. Yep. Sometimes it's like I got out of bed today, and that's a win, you know? So just meet yourself where you're at,
at
and there
that
is a
moment.
light at the tunnel.
Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely. Well, thank you
exactly.
so much, Amanda. Thank you for sharing your story. And,
Thank you for
and
holding space.
yeah, it was a powerful story. And, and you taken definitely, you're making beauty from ashes in your life for sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate you letting me share. I don't share often, so I really do appreciate the space holding. Thank you
Oh,
so much.
definitely. Thank you so much.